as a commodity. That's very important. As a commodity. I was down there with the Bureau lady. 3 cats whiskey, 4 sugars, 5 Negroes. It's a very different thing than steerage. A very different thing than indenture. We really need to understand that. People come to the museum, and they really want to talk, and they can't find ways to do it. And they'll say stuff like, you know, I just don't know how they're able to do that. And my parents did that, and others. She says, you know, and my folk, my grandmother didn't have slaves. Of course they did. Because we know them, and know their names. So that's an understandable kind of thing. So what are you trying to say? So I tell them, I said, you know, they didn't. But they hope like you to go up and have some. And that's important, that's key. Why? Because the slave was the gold standard of the day. And just like you want your child to go up and get that Mercedes or that Porsche or that big job, and we've got to begin, and I'm saying, he said use the history. We've got the healing history. We've got to use that to understand what it is to build cohesion instead of division. That's for the blame. It's for the guilt. It's just true. And how do we deal with that? You're right. Good God. Commodity. Then we need to understand what that means. You know, without having to deal with, oh my God, and be bent down. Then we can begin to talk about that, what that means. Then we begin to get to some serious, what I call civic responsibility. And then we begin to get into some civic repentance. Something this country has not dealt with. Everyone wants to reconcile, but nobody's done anything. You know, well, you've got to repent before you reconcile. So if grandma and grandpa were really cool, and didn't allow anybody to say nigger, and didn't allow folks to treat people badly and stuff like this, it's like, well, why wasn't grandma and grandpa on the street with them other white folks? They were trying to fight against that. So if we forgive grandma and grandpa for not being able to take that next step, you know, honor them for the step they took. But forgive them for that piece. And also forgive yourself for whatever you're not doing. You know, when you aren't doing the right thing, but are taking the easy way out. You start getting into repentance. And begin to talk about that. You know, about yourself, like, you know, wow, why didn't I? And don't beat yourself over the head about it. But forgive yourself for not doing it. And out of that forgiveness, you begin to make those strides. Because you're saying, this is very, very important. If we begin to actually teach that in our classes, and teach that to young people, we begin to realize that there will become a change, and that this only comes with trust. Also, begin to understand, all of us have friends. Who hurts you the most? A friend. Why? Because you trust them. It's a fragile bridge that has to be built almost every day. And then when you become that bridge, I was at a conference in Switzerland, and the thing that really stands out most, the guy got me and said, you know, when you become a bridge, you've got to be prepared to be walking. But it gives a different connotation to walk. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that in language is so powerful. So we've got to begin to use that. You know, so when young people are doing certain kind of things, they say they walk over me, that doesn't mean being a doorman. Because they're all kind of bridges. And I tell people all the time, oftentimes on a drawbridge, okay. Because you're into that. You know, let's go to our place and rest for a minute. But I'm saying that that's what I mean from a cultural standpoint, we've got to begin to understand the cultures from which we come. And what threatens those cultures. And how do we begin to find a language that's going to be cohesive and not divisive?
Well, from the very earlier, you asked a question about social, and you quickly got a framework that culture and social, there might be similarities, but there are also unique differences, and so we need to understand that. One of the things that it says to me about being a teacher in this social work, cultural work, is paying attention both to the language that we use, as well as uncovering the presuppositions that we have, owning the prejudices that we have and the biases that we have, and trying to come to terms with where they come from, how we came about them, that kind of thing. I have to tell you that one of the first books I ever read, and I didn't know I was going to become a teacher. This was 1969. The book is by Postman and Weingartner called Teaching as a Subversive Activity.
Oh, yes.
You remember this? Chapter 1, Crack Detecting in Schools.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting things in that book for me was there's a part about walking into a classroom every day, and it said, take a 3x5 card and put this on your mirror. So when you're brushing your teeth or shaving or whatever you're doing, look at this little card and think about this. What am I going to teach today? What is it good for? How do I know? And then from that, after working with that and doing this myself, I learned to put another card on my mirror. Think about the kid that you're going to be working today who's the biggest pain in the butt. The kid you are sort of reluctant to see. Put yourself in their seat before school began and ask yourself, what is she going to teach today? What is it good for? How do I know? Learn to empathize with the people that you work with, beginning with the adults who are in the school. I would argue that most of the problems in American schools are there before the teachers get there. They're there before the kids get to school, and they're there after the kids leave. The problems are often about adults. Let me frame this in another way. Here's some dangerous, powerful words: sexism, racism, ethnocentrism. There's another one that we're very guilty of, that you seldom ever hear. And think about coupling this term with racism or sexism. The term is adultocentrism. Okay? The natural tendency of adults not to decenter from their natural ego and put themselves into the shoes of the children they're working for. So it's not surprising. So many, and I used to run into this as a kindergarten teacher, people who are talking to kids like cutesy little. Well, I learned to talk to 3-year-olds like I talk to 40-year-olds. There's something about honoring them as people, as human beings. So this tendency of adultocentrism, to think that to explain something you have to break it down in simple little terms, or children are incomplete adults, or ill-formed adults. Every 5-year-old I know is holy and wholly 5. They have complete philosophies, complete worldviews. The world is working fine for them. It might be true that they think there's a monster under their bed at night. It might be true that when they're walking down the street and they see their shadow, they think the sun is following them. But it's a complete worldview. It's a complete philosophy. So how do we learn to honor that? Finally, I think the person who has influenced me the most in thinking about this as a teacher is a person who's influenced me the most as a human being. And that is Martin Luther King. When I lived in Japan and was living in Hiroshima at age 14, I started asking my parents, why are we here? It's 1963 and the South is burning and the leaders are ministers. Why are we back there with our folks? And I mean folks, all of us. What are we doing in Japan, in the most literate country in the world, where less than 1% of people are Christians? Why are you banging your head against the wall, Mom and Dad, hoping there'll be 10 or 15 people showing up for church? When we could be living in Prattville, Alabama, and my father would be the minister of the First Presbyterian Church. And the message was that, Walter, one of the reasons for living in Hiroshima is to learn about the commonalities of being human. Not only difference, but commonalities. So this leads me to probably the most important thing I ever learned to memorize, and that was 3 days before Dr. King was assassinated, he gave his last sermon at the Episcopal Cathedral in Washington, D.C. And the sermon was called "A Great Revolution is Coming." We talked about revolution in 3 ways. He talked about how the world is more and more of a neighborhood, but isn't it any more of a humanhood. He talked about how he talked, for example, how you could get on an airplane in Tokyo and arrive in LA before you left. He talked about what he had for breakfast. He had cocoa from Haiti, and he had marmalade from Canada, and he had coffee from Brazil, and he's connected to the world. But any